you have it, a nearly perfect stitch on the widest width in zigzag, which for this machine is one of the hardest things to do without buckling or tunneling or having any issues. And this is after taking it apart completely, the whole thing, the case. The reason I did that is because it's seized up. So the first thing in this, how to take care of your Singer Heavy Duty, is lubricate it. So that doesn't happen. Okay? Let's talk about where you might lubricate it. The obvious place that everyone talks about, let's quickly take out the sewing plate. Just gotta massage those. Alright, so lubricate, lubricate, lubricate. Not over lubricate. So underneath the bobbin case, which, by the way, is one of the first places to, once you put it back, have to be worried about adjustments. The bobbin case thread distance is something to keep in mind. The thread gap here, that gap right there should be about that. About maybe a credit card thickness between the plastic and this bumper. Now to get underneath here and lubricate stuff, you could technically just remove the bobbin. You'll see there's a little hole in there. And the lubricant that I use is Tri-Flow. Seems like everyone else is using it, and I happen to have it around as a bike mechanic, and it's apparently totally cool to be used on these sewing machines. So a few drops. 1, I'm totally missing. 2, there's a wick in there that holds lubricant. Obviously you should be cleaning extra so it doesn't get in your thread and onto your garment or whatever. Anyway, that's one place that you can lubricate. If that's not enough and you've been using this thing for a long time and it has done one of the worst things it can do, which for me was that it seized up. The friction on the wheel was just really hard. I've been using it for a few years and hadn't lubricated it once. Other places you can lubricate. You're going to have to start taking stuff apart here. There's a screw to remove your front plate. You can put a drop or two on the actual needle arm. Obviously this goes up and down. It intersects with the aluminum casing down here. Maybe a drop. And up here, maybe a drop. There's also all sorts of places where little axles rotate inside of little barrels, and those are also good spots. Let's see if I can get in there and show you a better shot. So in here, I lubricated down there and up there where the rod goes through. Now, here's the other side. We take off this top, and anywhere else that you see a axle going through a fixed bearing, you can add a drop or two in there. Don't add lube to places where there's actual grease. As long as there's grease on the gears, then you should be good. You can also order sewing machine grease and grease it if for some reason that's missing. Right, so just lubricating should be your solution to any seizing problems that I ran into. But this video, I also want to help folks who, for whatever reason, be it something just went out of alignment by accident, or you, like me, took your whole machine apart, tried to put it back together, and had issues with the way it was working, the timing, etc. I'm going to go over the things that you need to make sure are in alignment so that your timing is right and you can get a really nice stitch. So one of the first things to keep in mind is the alignment between the, so let's talk about things you probably don't want to unscrew. Let's just talk about where all the alignments are and how to screw them up and fix them. So right here, this is the first place where your main rod, the main axle I should say, which is driven directly by the motor via this belt, the main axle starts to interface with something else. That is the sewing stitch modes gears, right? So that's right down in here. We have the relationship between the main axle, which drives the needle, and the stitch modes. And evidence that that is off would be that your needle is going side to side in the wrong time. Now, most cases that's not going to be happening. The needle goes down on one side in a zigzag, then switches to the other and goes down on the other. And if that's happening, you should be golden. If it's going up and down or trying to go side to side while it's in the fabric, that would be a sign that your stitch mode to axle timing is off. And these little hex screws there, if you undo them, rotate the needle and then redo them at a time where the needle is going left and right. Basically, you just have to go back and forth. Unfortunately, there's no obvious notches or anything on the axle itself that show you the perfect alignment there. So you'd have to go back and forth, tightening and loosening that until the needle goes left and right when it is out of the fabric. So that's the first intersection of the main axle and something that can get out of timing. The next one is the way the belt then translates the action down to the bottom. And yes, you should unplug your machine before you fuck with it. So down here, of course, the upper drive axle interacts with this axle, and this is your bobbin axle primarily. It's also driving your feed dogs. So those two things also need to have their timing correct. Let's start with the feed dogs. So the feed dogs, obviously the feet that go up and down to draw in the fabric, they should be, just for reference, they should be, I'm going to try and get this horizontal as possible, they should be going down below the surface. So it's drawing in the fabric. They should be going down just as the needle is puncturing the what would be the surface of the fabric. Yep. So down. So it's coming down with it, and if the plate was on, it would be going just below the surface with that needle. Right? So my feed dogs are in the right place, and it's working. How that can get thrown out of whack, there's a number of ways that can go thrown out of whack, especially if you've taken the whole dang thing apart and tried to put it back together. Let me show you. So, one place that can get thrown out of whack is if you disconnect this belt, right? If you just disconnected the belt and turned the axle or turned the main axle and threw them out of whack, don't panic. That's actually the least harmful way to throw it out of whack. You can just keep turning one while it's off. You can, take this off, turn one axle until the feed dogs you think are in the right position, slide it back on while rotating it back on to help you get it to catch. And basically, again, testing it out until you have that alignment that I was showing you earlier. So as long as you didn't mess with these hex screws, the cool thing is you won't have to do any micro adjustments. You'll just have to figure out which notch this belt was in correctly. If you did undo the hex screws to, for whatever reason, just try to mess with the alignment, then yes, this is how you would change the micro adjustments on the relationship between your feed dogs, this bar, and your needle, which is the upper axle. So that's your feed dog alignment. Next thing, we have probably one of the most important, and something that I would do last if your feed dogs are also out of alignment. But next thing is, let's see if I can get my phone holder to participate, would be the bobbin timing. This one's really important. This is also known as like the hook timing. The hook on the bobbin feeder. So let's talk about that. The hook on the bobbin feeder, so in order to really show you that, I have to take out the bobbin case. So these two screws and this little guard here, I'm not using the correct terms. I apologize to real sewing machine mechanics out there. So there's the hook, right? Let's see if I can get it to focus in the right spot. you got your hook and your needle. And obviously, let's actually thread the needle so I can show you it happening. Oh, don't let me forget to show you how to make sure that the alignment of your needle and your needle threader is correct, because I threw that out. So, let's go. Right, so obviously the needle comes down, and this is in zigzag mode, so there's two sides that you want to have the hook working on. And you can see that the hook on the left side, when it's in zigzag, is going to hook right above the needle, right above the eye of the needle. It should be passing right there on that left side, and that is a successful hook. And then when it comes back around, and then the needle goes to the other side, it's going to be a little bit earlier in its stage. So this one is like maybe a millimeter or two above the eye of the needle. Again, I'm just focusing in right here on that timing on the right hand side. Come back to the left hand side. Right like that. And one of the reasons why it's actually on the uptake rather than the downward motion of the needle is that when it comes back, that actually causes there to be slack from friction in the fabric, and that makes it easier to hook. Okay, the other thing is you'll notice that this corresponds to that hole there, but that's not because the needle necessarily needs to dip that low. My needle depth, I'm thinking here, is pretty correct. I tested it based on other singers that were factory set, and I'll show you in a moment how to set that depth. Okay, right, let's talk about the timing though. How do I get this timing of this to match with the needle in case it's off for any reason? So underneath, we were talking about the axle here. This is the, let's zoom out a little, the main axle for the bobbin. Let's say you've set your feed dogs correctly and made sure the belt matched over on the right. Now what we can do here is we can, if you want to do micro adjustments, one of the easiest things you can do is you can disengage the threads on, or the hex screws on this screw here. There's 1 and 2. And this gear drives up against a worm gear that's in there. I don't think we can see it. Let's see if I can turn on my flash. Nope, there's a guard. There's a plastic guard. But there's a worm gear that connects to that one. And if you undo this one, you should be able to freely turn your bobbin hook until it is in the correct alignment. And then you can tighten those 2 screws on that gear back up again, really nice and tight. So hopefully that's the only thing you may have messed with in terms of your bobbin. But again, if you're like me and you took everything apart, which was a mistake, although I've learned a lot, then you may have taken this plate off. If you've done that or you've loosened these 2 screws, then there's something else you need to be concerned with, which, first of all, by taking this plate off, which holds that bobbin hook and worm gear, is that you can obviously throw the timing off that way, in which case, if you haven't undone any hex screws, that's cool because you just have to make sure the 2 gear teeth are in the right orientation to each other, and that way you don't have to do any micro adjustments. But speaking of the teeth being together, the screws here, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5, these are all ways to adjust the tension between these gears. Let's see if I can actually show you where the gears meet. Right, so the tension between that worm gear back there and this one, that is a very micro important thing that can reduce the friction and tension on your entire machine, because I always try to find the balance of, you know, how easy it can possibly be to crank the wheel and move it, right? Because the seizing is not good. It's too much friction. You want a nice balance of minimum amount of friction, but if your gears are too loose, then you can get wobble and movement, and your bobbin hook can like shake around too much. And so there's this relationship between how tight it is, which you kind of want to, in my opinion, loose enough that you don't feel too much friction. If you push this down, and then tighten them, you're going to potentially add too much friction between those gears. And that's going to add resistance and make the machine run a little less smoothly, in my opinion. But if you push this down, if you lift this back up to release the tension, then you might introduce too much wiggle between these gears, and you are also going to be, when that plate moves up towards the camera, you're going to be moving the hook wheel also up, which can cause the needle to bump up against the hook. So if you're getting a lot of metal clanging sounds, first of all, check, of course, to make sure your needle's not bent. But if the needle's hitting that hook, it's probably, if you've tried to mess with your alignment back here, because you've moved this too high up and moved the whole casing. So there's a relationship between the pressure on the gears, the smoothness of the machine, and the positioning of that. And so it's all just micro adjustments. Once you've got the main timing alignment, it's all micro adjustments here to make sure you're not banging the needle against the hook, and you're not adding too much friction there. But that's the bobbin timing. We talked about the feed dog timing, and we talked briefly about the stitch mode timing. So pretty much the last thing would be the needle depth. I mean, there's probably other things you could have unscrewed and thrown out of whack, but if you didn't go too crazy taking things apart. The other thing is needle depth, and that is set, let's see if I can get this here. That is set by this screw, this hex screw here. Don't worry, I've undone it, and it wasn't the end of the world. So basically, you can undo this, and that will let this bar, which is holding the needle, go up and down, and you set it so that it is just above the base of the bobbin hook case. And you should be golden. It's also, of course, your hook height is going to also change the relationship between the eye of the needle and the bobbin hook. So I would make sure this is set before you do your bobbin timing. And then lastly, just for funsies, because it's medium important, not the most important, this second hook, hex screw is going to determine the depth at which your thread helper can come down. It's basically, all this is it's attached to a little, let's see if I can zoom in on it, like a little black metal, come on, focus way down, not that far down. Anyway, there's a black, oh, you saw it for a second. There's a black hook that this will come down and hit. And that black metal hook is attached to that second hex block. And so the distance here, you're just going to set, make sure your needle is in the upright or the up position, pretty much as high as it can go. And then you're going to try your needle feeder. And if it goes right through the eye of the needle, obviously you're good. And if it doesn't, then you can adjust that stopper there, up and down. I also just want to say that I was concerned that maybe my tension issues that I was having, it seemed like I had mismatched tension. I thought they might have been caused by a mismatch in the take-up arm, but the take-up arm timing in relationship to the needle is set by the arm system here and the pinions and all that, and there's really no adjustments you can make here. It's all set by, it might look like, for example, there's a hex screw right there, and you think, oh, maybe that can help me with that timing. That hex screw actually presses against a flat side on this pinion. It has just like a flat side to that pinion, so when you screw it in, it forces it into the right orientation, and there's really no way to screw that up. So I was happy to find that that's just fixed and not something that I could have screwed up. And then lastly, the simplest one, and this is, funny to me, online there are people who swear never touch your bobbin tension. But I did use just a nice little screwdriver. I undid the sacred factory set bobbin tension. I backed it off a little bit, and it solved almost all of my residual final stitch issues that I was having after my rebuild. And these things are like $8 on Amazon, so if you screw it up, you can try again. Or maybe get it one off Amazon and use that and leave your default one that came with the machine and just don't touch it. But it's not the end of the world. I survived playing with my bobbin tension. I'm almost done. One other thing, what was I going to say? Another thing is that, like, when I rebuilt this and thought, before I get to that, two things on my mind. One is when you do put your bobbin case back in, this is like, in the manual, this is not special high-level knowledge here. You can jimmy it in around those two bobbin, these are thread gap stops here. So these keep the case from shaking around too much, these guys, but they also have to let the thread come around and wrap around the actual bobbin case, right? When it gets hooked, the loop has to go around that whole thing. So they both have to keep the case in there and also let the thread pass through them. So this one is spring-loaded. This side here has got a little spring, which is helpful. This other side does not have a spring. This side determines this thread gap, as they call it. And like I said earlier, it's about like a business card distance. I found this doesn't make a huge difference. If you're getting like rattling in your stitches, you get a lot of like noise and rattling going on. This could be part of the problem. If it's too loose, if it's too tight, your threads can get bunched up and not be able to pass through these gaps. So, like I said, just a little bit of wiggle, and this is all based on what I observed with other machines. It can be really annoying and fussy to tighten these, so I just like do a soft tighten on them. I think I may have nailed it. A soft tighten, and then you can just sort of bump a little bit in either direction until it's right, and then do the full tighten. So that's the bobbin. Oops, see, just by tightening that, it threw it back out of whack. It's annoying that this is something that they expect amateurs to just have to do on the regular. And some machines don't actually have this. This is the Singer Heavy Duty, obviously. Has this here. Some machines don't actually adjust it here. They adjust it on the plate itself. Anyway, so the last thing I was going to say is that I was, after putting it all back together, having some issues with tunneling, which is when that's my perfect stitch. Let me show you a mistake. Here's a bunch of test mistakes. So I was getting issues where with the zigzag stitch, it would want to scrunch horizontally. They call that tunneling. And I thought that by increasing the pressure of my presser foot, I could, smush the fabric tighter, and that would hold it so that it wouldn't be able to bunch inward. First thing I did to fix this tunneling problem was I reduced the tension of my bobbin, because it was also giving me some Y stitches, depending on the situation, like this. It was giving me some Ys on the bottom, so it was too tight on the bottom. I undid the bobbin tension a little bit. That helped a little bit. And then I just found that backing off the tension of my presser foot, actually, I can't really explain it. I could come up with a BS answer for why that helped, but that gave me my nice, flat, non-tunneled, and this is very smooth fabric, so it tends to want to do that on thinner fabric. And I put a pretty fat needle in there, heavy-duty needle, which can also be a culprit for all kinds of weird tension issues because the holes are so big, the threads just fall right through. But anyway, that's how I ended up with this nice stitch. And I hope that this will help anyone out there who's taken apart a Singer heavy duty trying to solve problems. Maybe you ran into more, got terrified like I did, that I threw off a very specialized and just overcomplicated machine that I would never be able to figure out. But it's actually, spend a few days with it, it's not that complicated, and you can put it back in alignment. You just have to curl up in a ball in a few nights in feeling defeated. But no, a lot of people kind of shit on this machine, but I think the entirely aluminum case is cool. I'm just wowed by any sewing machine and the fact that it works even after I took it apart. It's great. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'm not a pro, not a professional by any means. I'm sure there are professionals out there who are cringing watching this, but just if you're cheap and you bought a cheap sewing machine and you want to fix it, hopefully this will help. And I spent a lot of time with it, so put any questions in the comments or your own helpful thoughts. Cool. Thank you guys for watching, and maybe see you in the next one. Maybe this is my last sewing machine video. I don't really know what this channel is yet. Hopefully we'll figure it out. Bye.